We have got some comparisons. We have got our first set of conclusions. Data sets are in. We have compared high rarity character with high map rarity, high rarity character with low map rarity, and low rarity character with high map rarity. We've got those results, we've pulled them all together, and they're in a position where we can start to present some findings. We can start to present the actual impact of rarity as it's having on maps. There's going to be more data coming, but I figured there's enough here to get you guys a good and interesting update. So let's get right on into the data. If you do enjoy these videos as well, guys, don't forget to hit that like button, really helps. Maybe hit that subscribe button as well. There's going to be more coming. And yeah, here's some spreadsheets and some methodologies and some things we've changed. First up then, let's talk about the methodology changes. If you haven't seen the full methodology, I'm not going to go over it in this video. There is about an 8-minute video, it's linked in the description, that goes over everything we're doing. High level, we're working out what impact rarity has. We did some initial tests and we were a bit concerned we weren't capturing enough data. So for that reason, we decided we were going to capture all the breadth of currency and not just the top end. That being said, we have included our top end results in here and done a few comparisons on those. I think they're reasonably interesting nonetheless. We also noticed during our initial testing that there was a disproportionate amount of loot coming from bosses, coffers, chests. We were also thinking about how long it was taking, and we decided that adding a white breach tablet to every map, so we at least got one breach with some monsters in it, was probably okay. I was going to look at something, if we do look at something to do with currency accumulation, and I will talk about that and how greater and perfects work later on. I've cite something from GGG, and then I've got some comments about that. If we do decide to look into that deeper, I'll be setting those values at 15 times and 75 times their base value for any direct comparisons. It seems fair enough based on the drop rates, but I'm really not clear on exactly how that works. But yeah, some ideas. We've come to some initial conclusions, just to talk you through them. There is definitely a hard diminishing returns. Somewhere after 550, it doesn't look like we're having that much impact, even if we effectively times that by 2.5 times, so going up to effectively 1,375% rarity. It just you'd expect huge results. There's not the big results. Well, we say we'd expect huge results. We're seeing the diminishing returns on Zesh Edit, and therefore, you know, we can just assume that we weren't going to see that much more, and it does kind of line up with that. And the optimal, I believe, the optimal amount of rarity on your maps and tablets, so it's going to depend completely on what your local rarity on your character is. That's the test we're targeting now. We're trying to find that sweet spot. Haven't found it yet, so do stay tuned for the next video. Hopefully that will be revealing what that is, so long as we can pinpoint it. I will go into this theory on low currency, on currency and low maps. We will go into that a bit later on in a little bit more detail. I've got about a minute's stuff to say about that. But let's jump on over to the actual results, the actual data. We're here with the spreadsheet, woo, and the crowd goes wild. So, first tab, currency tiers. This is the current assumed tiering of currency. We don't actually get this information in game, but this is what's published up on the wiki. We'll be using this for any grouping later on. It will become important, especially when we're looking at orbs of chance, annulments, and divine orbs. When we're looking at that grouping, with even getting 1,500 drops, you're not seeing like hundreds of divines in that. So, our sample set for those particular drops is rather small, so remember that for grouping up later. Looking at our results, we've got 400 high tier results, so these are just exalts or above, at 550 rarity with 0 map rarity. We have the same up to 400 drops with 550 character, 120 map rarity. We have all of the drops up to 1,500 drops, same conditions as the first there, 550 character rarity, 0 map. We have all of the drops again, 550 rarity, 120 map, and there's some interesting results. The first thing you probably notice between these two is, oh my god, you got 4 more divines with the map rarity. Yeah, but we also got two more without the map rarity. But we got basically the same number of unique drops here. We got 17 versus, I believe it was 17 versus 15. So the tolerance there is really similar, and honestly not really what we'd expect when we look at the rest of the results. And then we also have 750 drops here. This is done with 77 character rarity and 120 on map, and we have extrapolated this out to 1,500 so we can use it for the comparison. We will of course complete this data set, but I think it's useful to have this comparison there because it's already starting to show some interesting trends. Let's have a look at this comparison. So, first off, we've got all of our data here in one big scary table. We're not going to look at it like that because it's pointless. That was just so I could have it here easier to use for these tables and make it do this. I've locked things and stuff. If you call me a bad data scientist again, I'll probably bust out Power BI and then we'll really get into it. I'll do a pie chart and a funnel chart and an exploding donut, and you guys will not know what's hit you. Anyway, right. 550 map rarity difference. So we've got our 0 rarity on map and our 120 rarity on map. And I think the first thing you can notice is there is a massive drop in the low tier currency. That's the stuff you'd normally have filtered out, but it's simply not dropping as much. They are, for the most part, being converted up into Regals, Exalts, Alchemies, and Vals. Don't think the data set down here. I think we've got 2 more chances, 4 less Divines, Annulments, Chances, Divines. They're all really rare drops. We're getting roughly the same amount of drops there. But there is a significant swing towards the mid, and you would expect then if we could get this up to 15,000 drops, we might actually start to see a swing at the top end as well, where the 120 rarity would start to have a bit of an impact there. That being said, the swing into drops that you really, really want, it's not happening. So what does this actually mean from... This is party play, right? So if you're running a rarity bot, I don't think you need to run any rarity on your maps or tablets. I think you can get away without it. You can just fill it up with more rare monsters and you'll probably have a better time. You just ignore rarity as a stat entirely and just try and get your maps as juicy as possible if you're up at this 550 sort of limit with your bot. Or even 600, 625, whatever the number might be that you've managed to get to. Hats off if you're the top number there. Now, 550, this was difference between all high tier. So what I've done here is I've taken all of the high tier drops and added them to the high tier drops from our 1500 sets, and we can still start to see here we start to balance out in the high tier drops. We've actually got 2 more high tier drops when we add those 2 data sets together. So that's why I think we don't really have enough numbers there to see if there is an impact. There is one. You're not going to notice it probably over a league unless you're playing like 8 to 12 hours a day. So I would just add, as I said, add more juice into your maps, and I think you're going to have a good time. We can still see that swing occurring for Exalts, although if you consider that we've got 48 more drops in the right-hand column, and we took away these 36, they're basically even, right? You'd be seeing very, very, very little change at 550 rarity when adding rarity as a multiplier on your map. Now, if we keep going across... We've got the character rarity difference. Now, this is with our extrapolated data, but this is where we start to see some more interesting results. So, with 120 rarity on character, and which is effectively, because with the Atlas setup, the 120 on map, goes to 150%, thereabouts, and the 77. You end up about 190 to 200% rarity versus 1,375% rarity. You can see that, yep, we've got more drops at the top end, about 50% more drops. So getting up from that 200% number close to the 550 in some way. So if you had 150 rarity and you had 300% rarity on maps, you'd have 600 rarity. I would expect you to start seeing the drops kind of close to what we're seeing with a 550 rarity bot. So if you're sitting at high rarity on your character, like 330, you probably want to be going for like 50% rarity on your map. You'd be dropping great drops, like really, really good drops. And then if you got, say, 200, you'd want to be going for 300 on your map. Mind you can boost all this with the Atlas. And you want to be trying to get to that 500 mark, I think, for maps. All multipliers taken into account. You can see when we're less than half that, we are getting what looks like half the drops. And similarly, we've compared that same data set against the 550 rarity with no map rarity, and yep, we're seeing much better drops in the lower tier. For some reason, we seem to be dropping really, really well in the low tier, and for some reason we've dropped Regals and Exalts in the high tier, which I do find that a bit strange. But we've got significantly better drops in the top tier again. So it looks to me like getting to about 200 rarity on map is holding you quite well in the mid-tier currency, and 500 is maybe pushing you into the high-tier currency. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about how greaters and perfects, in fact, I'm going to cut right now over to a clip of Jonathan talking about how perfects and graters work, and then I'm going to talk about those, and then we're going to have a little look about what we can do with this data to help ourselves juice maps properly for our characters. And we're going to come up with just a couple of rules that you can look at and hopefully follow that will start to improve things now. So I haven't got the nailed down figures, but I think if we start to work around this, you'll start to see improvements. So over to Jonathan.
It's dropping too many transmutes, we want to instead drop these more powerful ones. The way that actually works is that as you get higher level, it specifically takes like some of the juice, if you will, of the transmutes that would have dropped,
official term,
and then instead drops higher level ones a bit less often. So the kind of the idea is that it's like, you know, we're getting rid of the crap you don't want and kind of like making higher, like better stuff that you just get less.
So good.
And
so having watched that clip and having seen what we've seen through the drops, I think there's a couple of takeaways we can take from how this banking of drops to make them greater and then perfect is actually working. One, every person in the party is having the drop banked before it drops. So if a drop drops and there's 6 of you in the party, 6 of you, it says, you've accumulated a point towards getting a greater or a perfect, however it rolls. I think this is happening before Rarity is applied. That's why we see such a huge increase in the graters and perfects at the low tiers at high level, high rarity, because they're not actually dropping on the floor. There's some calculation happening before. So I think that Rarity actually isn't being applied to those. And I think there is some sort of session reset going on, which is why we haven't seen a perfect chaos despite dropping all of these chaos orbs, or they don't start accumulating unless you're in level 79, 80, 81 or 82 zones. One of those two things I think is occurring. The other option, or it's being reset, or it's reset on death, or it's reset set on character to exit. Something like that. But I'm not sure this banking is working particularly well when it comes to rarity stacking. Alright then guys, so what can we start to conclude from this? Well, if map rarity is a multiplier as they've said, and 550 on character is giving good results, then that's an achievable goal if you've got 125, 150 rarity on your character, to then multiply that up by 3 times. High rarity map, a couple of rarity tablets, and you're going to get there. It starts to become reasonably unachievable for lower rarity characters, and that's why I'm hopeful as we start to sort of narrow this down, we find that number to get decent currency actually comes down a bit lower. What I would be looking to do is, if you're lower than 150, juice with as much rarity as you can, under all conditions, to get the best drops. I would try and, I don't at this time know whether having 0 character rarity just means that map rarity basically does nothing. We will have to do some tests, particularly around that number on character, but I would certainly try and get some rarity on character. I mean, most builds should be able to fit 50 to 100 comfortably somewhere. And that's really my conclusion at this time. There'll be more data coming. We will certainly be testing closer to those points that now we know that there's a break point at the top end. We'll start to bring that down and find out when when that slide starts to really slip off. It does look like it slips off at 200. So yeah, if you're interested in this sort of thing, guys, do hit that like button if you haven't already, and get subscribed so you're notified as soon as the next video about this goes out. Right, that's what it's for. Hit that bell or something. I don't know. Catch you in the next video, guys.